My name is Dorothy Mae Johnson, but everyone calls me Dot. I'm 72 years old now, and I live here in Savannah, Georgia, in a cozy little house just 3 blocks from Forsyth Park. I spent 47 years working as a seamstress and alteration specialist, and I built a reputation for being able to fix just about anything made of fabric. These days, I live on my pension and Social Security, and I still take on the occasional sewing project for my neighbors. Life is quiet now, peaceful even, though it took a long, long time to find this peace after what happened. When you spend nearly half a century married to someone, you think you know them inside and out. You think you've seen every side of them, good and bad. But sometimes, honey, we don't know a thing, not a blessed thing. What I'm about to tell you is the story of how my entire life turned out to be something completely different than what I believed it was. And it all started with a doctor's appointment. I almost didn't cancel. It was September of 2019. I was 68 years old at the time, and Thomas and I had been married for 46 years. We had raised 3 children in the house Thomas built with his own hands, celebrated countless anniversaries, and I thought we were heading peacefully into our golden years together. That month, I had a routine colonoscopy scheduled at St. Joseph's Hospital. Nothing serious, just the preventive screening they recommend for folks our age. Thomas wasn't going with me because he said he had an important client meeting in Atlanta that he couldn't miss. He was a contractor, semi-retired by then, but still took on special projects for old clients. The procedure was scheduled for a Tuesday. I was supposed to check in at 6 in the morning, and with the prep and recovery time, I wouldn't be home until late afternoon. On Monday night, I did all the unpleasant preparation, and Thomas kissed my forehead before bed. "You'll do just fine tomorrow, Dottie," he said in that gentle voice of his. "I'll be thinking about you all day." He even made me promise to call him as soon as I woke up from the anesthesia. But Tuesday morning at 5 a.m., I got a call from the hospital. There had been an equipment malfunction, and they needed to reschedule all the procedures for that day. The nurse apologized profusely and offered me a new appointment for the following week. I was actually relieved. Those prep drinks are no joke, and I wasn't looking forward to the procedure itself. I tried calling Thomas right away to let him know, but his phone went straight to voicemail. He had probably already left for Atlanta. That's when I had an idea. Instead of telling him the appointment was canceled, I would spend the day doing something special. Maybe I'd deep clean the house, make his favorite meal, peach cobbler with vanilla ice cream, and surprise him with a lovely dinner when he got home. After 46 years, we had fallen into such a routine. I thought this might be a sweet way to break the monotony, to remind us both why we fell in love in the first place. What I didn't know was that this one small decision would crack open my entire world and show me that nothing, absolutely nothing, was what I thought it was. If you're enjoying my story, please leave a like to make this 72-year-old grandmother smile. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss my upcoming stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. It brings me such joy to know who's listening and from what corner of the world. I was born right here in Savannah in 1951. My mother, Lucille Johnson, was a housekeeper for one of the old families on Bull Street, and my father, Ernest, worked at the port loading and unloading cargo ships. We lived in a small shotgun house in the Yamacraw Village area. There were 6 of us children, and I was the 3rd oldest. Money was always tight, but Mama had a way of making everything feel abundant. She could stretch a Sunday chicken into 3 meals, and her cornbread and collard greens were the best I've ever tasted to this day. I learned to sew from my grandmother, Big Mama Rose, who lived with us until I was 12. She had been a laundress and seamstress for wealthy families all her life, and she had magic in her fingers. I can still see her sitting by the window in the afternoon light, mending a torn Sunday dress, or taking in a pair of pants. "Dorothy Mae," she'd say to me, "a woman who can sew will never go hungry. People always need their clothes fixed, and they'll pay good money for neat, invisible stitches." I started learning when I was about 7 years old in 1958. Big Mama Rose would give me scraps of fabric and thread, and I'd practice making straight lines, then curves, then little flowers. By the time I was 10, I could hem a dress as neat as anyone. When I was 12, Big Mama Rose passed away in her sleep, and I inherited her sewing basket, her good scissors, and her Singer sewing machine. That machine is still in my house today, 70 years old and still running. I went to school at Beach High School, the colored school back in those days before integration. I was a good student, especially in home economics, where I got to show off my sewing skills. My teacher, Mrs. Patterson, encouraged me to think about making it a real career. You have a gift, Dorothy. Don't waste it, she told me. In 1969, when I was 18 and fresh out of high school, I got my first real job at Friedman's Alterations downtown. Mr. Friedman was a kind Jewish man who saw past my age and my color and just cared about whether I could sew. I worked there for 6 years, learning the business side of things, how to deal with customers, how to price alterations, how to handle difficult fabrics like silk and velvet. It was in 1973, when I was 22, that I met Thomas Walker. He came into the shop needing his suit jacket altered for his sister's wedding. He was a tall, handsome man with kind, brown eyes and strong hands, rough from construction work. He was 25 at the time, already establishing himself as a carpenter and contractor. When I took his measurements, our hands touched, and I felt something I'd never felt before. A spark, I suppose you'd call it. You're mighty good at this, he said, watching me pin the jacket. I've been sewing since I was 7, I replied, trying not to let him see how nervous he made me. A woman with a trade. That's something special, he said, and the way he looked at me made my heart flutter. When he came back to pick up the jacket, he asked me to dinner. We went to a little soul food place on West Broad Street, and we talked for 3 hours straight. He told me about his dreams of starting his own contracting business, building houses for families who couldn't afford the big construction companies. I told him about my dream of opening my own alteration shop one day. We both came from hard-working families, both believed in honest labor and building something with our own hands. We courted for 2 years. They were beautiful years full of Sunday dinners with both our families, long walks through Forsyth Park, and stolen kisses in his old pickup truck. Thomas was always a gentleman, respectful and patient. My father approved of him, which meant everything to me. That boy's got a good head on his shoulders and a strong back, Daddy said. He'll take care of you. We got married in June of 1975. I was 24 and Thomas was 27. The ceremony was at First African Baptist Church, one of the oldest black churches in Savannah. My mother made my wedding dress, a simple but elegant ivory gown with lace sleeves, and I felt like a princess. The reception was in the church fellowship hall with fried chicken, potato salad, collard greens, and my aunt's famous red velvet cake. A local band played Motown songs, and we danced until our feet hurt. We started our married life in a tiny rental apartment near the port. Thomas worked long hours on construction sites during the day and took on side jobs in the evenings and on weekends. I kept working at Friedman's, and every penny we could spare went into our savings. We had a dream, you see. We wanted to buy land and build our own house, just like the families Thomas was building for. In 1977, when I was 26, we found a vacant lot in the Baldwin Park neighborhood. It wasn't much, just a quarter acre with some overgrown weeds and a few pine trees, but it was ours. Thomas drew up the plans himself and started building on weekends with help from his brothers and cousins. It took almost 2 years, but in 1979, we moved into our brand new 3-bedroom house. I can still remember the feeling of walking through that front door for the first time, knowing that every nail and board represented Thomas's sweat and our shared dreams. That same year, I found out I was pregnant with our first child. Michael Thomas Walker was born in March of 1980. A healthy baby boy with his father's eyes and my smile. Thomas was over the moon. He built a cradle, a changing table, and later, a toy box, all with his own hands. I took 6 months off work to care for the baby, and when I went back to Friedman's, my mother watched Michael during the day. Our second child, Patricia Lynn, came along in 1982. She was a beautiful little girl with big, curious eyes and a head full of curly hair. Our family felt complete, but in 1985, we got a surprise. I was pregnant again at 34 years old. Our youngest, James, was born that November, and he completed our family in a way I hadn't even known we needed. The 1980s were busy years. Thomas's contracting business grew steadily. He became known for quality work and fair prices, and he hired a small crew of men from the neighborhood. I left Friedman's in 1987 and finally opened my own shop, Dot's Alterations, in a small storefront on Bull Street. It was a dream come true. I specialized in wedding dresses, formal wear, and custom tailoring. Word spread, and soon I had customers coming from all over Savannah and even from the surrounding counties. Money was never abundant, but it was steady. We could pay our bills, take the kids to Tybee Island in the summer, and even save a little. Sunday dinners were our tradition. The whole family would gather at our house, my parents, Thomas's mother, our siblings, and their children. Thomas would grill ribs or chicken in the backyard while I made my famous mac and cheese, string beans, and sweet potato pie. The children would play in the yard, and we adults would sit on the porch drinking sweet tea and talking about everything and nothing. Michael grew up to be responsible and steady like his father. Patricia was artistic and creative, always drawing or making something. James, our surprise baby, was the comedian of the family, always making everyone laugh. Raising three children while running a business wasn't easy, but Thomas and I were a team. We supported each other through everything. In 1998, Michael graduated from Savannah State University and became a teacher. Patricia went to SCAD, the Savannah College of Art and Design, and became a graphic designer. James, my baby, decided to follow his father into contracting and started working with Thomas right after high school. The 2000s brought grandchildren. Michael married his college sweetheart, Keisha, and they gave us two grandchildren, Ayana and Marcus. Patricia married a nice young man named David, and they had twin girls, Sophie and Stella. James, always the independent one, didn't settle down as quickly, but he eventually married Nicole in 2015, and they had a son, Thomas Jr., named after his grandfather. By 2015, when I was 64, I was thinking about retirement. My hands were starting to ache from arthritis, and threading needles was getting harder even with my reading glasses. Thomas, at 67, had also slowed down considerably. He had turned most of the daily operations over to James and only took on special projects or consultation work. We should have been enjoying our golden years together, but I started noticing changes in Thomas around 2016. Small things at first, nothing alarming. He became more protective of his phone, taking it everywhere, even to the bathroom. He started going on more business trips, sometimes for 3 or 4 days at a time. When I asked about these trips, his answers were vague. Just consulting on a project in Atlanta or meeting with an old client in Charleston. He also became more concerned about his appearance. Thomas had never been vain, but suddenly he was getting haircuts more frequently, buying new clothes, even got himself some cologne. Just want to look professional for clients, he explained when I teased him about it. In 2017, I noticed he started keeping a separate calendar, a small pocket planner that he carried with him. When I asked about it, he said it was for his side projects. Didn't want to clutter the family calendar on the fridge. That made sense, I suppose, but something about it felt off. The business trips became more frequent in 2018. At least once a month, sometimes twice. He'd pack a small bag, kiss me goodbye, and head off to Atlanta or Charleston, or once even to Jacksonville, Florida. He always called in the evenings, sent sweet text messages, and brought back little gifts for me. I had no reason to suspect anything. Thomas had always been a faithful, devoted husband, but there were odd moments that stuck in my mind. Once I answered his phone when he was in the shower because it kept ringing. A woman's voice asked for Tom. Nobody called him Tom. He'd always been Thomas, even to his closest friends. When I told him about it later, he said it must have been a wrong number. Another time, I was cleaning out his truck and found a receipt from a restaurant in Atlanta dated on a day he said he'd been working on site all day and had eaten packed sandwiches. When I mentioned it, he got defensive. I must have given you the wrong day. The trips all blur together, Dottie. In early 2019, I found something more concerning. I was doing laundry and found a movie ticket stub in his jeans pocket. The movie was one I wanted to see, and I'd asked him to go with me, but he'd said he wasn't interested in those romantic comedies. Yet, here was proof he'd seen it, in Atlanta, on one of his business trips. Did you see this movie? I asked him, holding up the stub. He barely glanced at it. Oh, yeah. The client's wife wanted to see it, so we all went. It was actually pretty good. Client's wife. That was the first time he'd mentioned anyone's wife being on these trips, but I pushed down my suspicions. Thomas had given me no real reason to doubt him in 44 years of marriage. Maybe I was just being a paranoid old woman. Then came September 2019, and that canceled colonoscopy. After getting the call from the hospital that Tuesday morning, I decided to spend the day being productive. I started with the bedroom, dusting and organizing. Thomas's side of the closet was always a mess, and I decided to straighten it up as part of my surprise nice day for him. As I was organizing his shelf, I accidentally knocked down a stack of papers that tumbled to the floor. As I gathered them up, I noticed they were statements from a bank I didn't recognize. Georgia First Community Bank. We'd always banked at coastal states where we'd had accounts since 1975. Curious, I looked at the statement. It was in Thomas's name, and it showed regular deposits and withdrawals. But what caught my eye was the address listed. It wasn't our address in Savannah. It was an address in Macon, Georgia, a city about 3 hours away. 2847 Riverside Drive, Macon, GA. My heart started pounding. Why would Thomas have a bank account in Macon? Why would mail be going there? I sat on the bed staring at that address. Part of me wanted to put it back and forget I'd seen it. But another part of me, the part that had been collecting all those little odd moments over the past few years, knew I needed to understand what this meant. I went to our home computer, opened up Google Maps, and typed in the Macon address. The street view showed a nice suburban neighborhood with well-maintained homes. When I zoomed in on 2847 Riverside Drive, I saw a pretty two-story house with blue siding, white trim, and a garden full of flowers in the front yard. My hands were shaking as I opened Facebook on the computer. I knew Thomas had an account, though he rarely used it, or so I thought. I logged into his account. I knew his password because we'd set it up together years ago, and he'd never changed it. What I saw made my blood run cold. His profile picture wasn't the family photo we'd taken last Christmas. It was a picture I'd never seen before. Thomas with his arm around a woman I didn't recognize. A white woman with blonde hair, maybe in her early 60s, smiling brightly at the camera. His relationship status said, married to Linda Walker. Linda Walker. I scrolled through his page with trembling fingers. There were hundreds of photos I'd never seen. Thomas at birthday parties I'd never attended. Thomas at a beach I'd never been to. Thomas at Christmas dinners with people I'd never met. And in almost every single photo, there was Linda. Linda with her arm around his waist, Linda kissing his cheek, Linda holding his hand. There were other people in the photos too. A young man who looked strikingly like Thomas in his youth, a young woman with Thomas's eyes, grandchildren, teenagers and young adults I'd never seen before. The captions told a story I couldn't comprehend. Happy 40th anniversary to my wonderful husband, best 4 decades of my life. That was posted 2 years ago, 40 years. That would mean, so proud of our son David on his graduation day. Our beautiful daughter Amanda's wedding. They grow up so fast. Thanksgiving with the whole Walker clan. Every photo, every post showed a complete life I knew nothing about. A life in Macon, Georgia. A life with Linda. A life with different children, different grandchildren, different everything. I felt like I was going to be sick. I ran to the bathroom and dry heaved over the toilet, but nothing came up because I hadn't eaten since the prep for the colonoscopy that never happened. How was this possible? Thomas was with me. He was here, in Savannah, in our house, sleeping in our bed every night, except for those business trips, those trips to Atlanta. Atlanta was just an hour south of Macon. With shaking hands, I went back to the computer and looked more carefully at the Facebook page. I checked the dates of the posts. They were regular, weekly, sometimes daily. Thomas was active on this page in a way he'd never been on social media with our family. There were comments from people calling him Tom. Great to see you, Tom. Thanks for fixing the deck, Tom. Looking forward to the barbecue at Tom and Linda's place. Tom. That's what the woman on the phone had called him. That's who he was in Macon. Not Thomas, Tom. I looked at Linda's profile. She had even more photos. Her page was public, so I could see everything. She worked as a nurse at the medical center in Macon. She had 2 children, David and Amanda. David was a physical therapist. Amanda was a teacher. There were photos of Linda's grandchildren, 4 of them, all blonde and beautiful. In her About section, it said she'd been married to Tom Walker since 1979, the same year Thomas and I moved into our house. The same year I got pregnant with Michael. How could he be married to both of us? How long had this been going on? I searched for David Walker and Amanda Walker on Facebook. Both had their pages set to public. I spent the next 2 hours going through their photos, their posts, their lives. David, who was apparently 40 years old, had photos going back to his teenage years. Tom was in many of them. Father and son at baseball games. Father and son building a treehouse. Father and son at high school graduation. Amanda, who was 38, had similar photos. Thomas teaching her to ride a bike. Thomas walking her down the aisle at her wedding. Thomas holding her babies. These weren't recent relationships. This wasn't a late life affair. Thomas had been living 2 complete lives for decades. For most of our marriage, I felt like I was losing my mind. How was this logistically possible? I started doing calculations in my head. We lived in Savannah. This other family lived in Macon, about a 3-hour drive. Thomas's business trips were usually 3 to 4 days long, sometimes a week. He went once or twice a month, sometimes more. I pulled up his work calendar from the fridge and started counting. Over the past year, Thomas had been gone for approximately 90 days total. 3 months, a quarter of the year. I went back to the bedroom and searched more thoroughly through his things. I found more bank statements, all going to the Macon address. I found credit card statements for cards I'd never seen. One statement showed regular charges at a grocery store in Macon, a gas station in Macon, restaurants in Macon. In the back of his closet, hidden behind a garment bag, I found a box. Inside were photographs. Thomas with Linda and 2 children at Disney World. Thomas and Linda at what looked like a wedding. Thomas with his arm around teenage David. Thomas holding baby Amanda. The photos dated back to the early 1980s. In some of them, Thomas looked exactly as I remembered him from those years. The same haircut, the same mustache he'd worn back then, even the same watch I'd given him for his 30th birthday. He'd been living both lives simultaneously from the very beginning. I don't know how long I sat there on the bedroom floor, surrounded by evidence of my husband's secret life. It could have been minutes or hours. I was numb, in shock, unable to process what I was seeing. Finally, I heard the sound of Thomas's truck pulling into the driveway. I looked at the clock. It was 6 p.m. He was home from his trip to Atlanta. I quickly gathered all the papers and photos and shoved them back into the box. I put the box in my sewing room, where Thomas never went, and closed the door. Then I splashed cold water on my face and tried to compose myself. Thomas came through the front door with a bouquet of flowers and a bag from my favorite bakery. "Dottie, how'd it go today? I've been worried sick about you." He pulled me into a hug, and I stood there stiffly, unable to respond. "The doctor said everything's fine? No polyps or anything?" I pulled back and looked at this man I'd been married to for 44 years. This man I'd raised 3 children with. This man who had apparently raised 2 other children with another woman at the same time. "Thomas," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "we need to talk." His face changed. Something flickered in his eyes. Fear, maybe, or resignation. "About what, honey?" "About Linda. About Macon. About the life you've been living that I knew nothing about." The color drained from his face. He set down the flowers in the bakery bag very carefully, and then he sank into the armchair like all the air had gone out of him. "How?" he whispered. "How did you find out?" "The colonoscopy was canceled. I came home. I found the bank statements. I found your Facebook page. I found everything, Thomas, everything." We sat there in silence for what felt like an eternity. I waited for him to explain, to justify, to tell me it wasn't what it looked like. But he just sat there with his head in his hands. "How long?" I finally asked. "How long have you been married to her?" "Since 1979, he said quietly. "Before me or after me?" "After, 4 years after you. But Dottie, please understand." "4 years?" I interrupted. "You married her in 1979 when we'd been married for 4 years, when I was pregnant with Michael." He nodded miserably. "Are you legally married to both of us? Is that even possible?" "No," he admitted. "I'm legally married to you. The marriage to Linda, it was a ceremony, but we never filed the license. She thinks we're married, but legally, we're not." "So you've been lying to her, too?" "I never meant for it to get this complicated," he said, and he actually had tears in his eyes. "I met Linda at a construction site in Macon. I was working on a hospital expansion, and she was a nurse there. We started talking, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years." "So you married her?" "I didn't plan to. It just happened. She got pregnant with David, and she wanted to get married. I couldn't say no. I couldn't tell her about you. So I had the ceremony, and I let her believe it was legal." "And you've been going back and forth ever since? For 40 years?" "Yes." I felt like I was going to be sick again. "Do our children know? Does Michael, Patricia, James, do they know they have half-siblings?" "No, nobody knows. Not your family, not her family. I've kept both lives completely separate." "How?" I demanded. "How is that even possible?" "I told you I was building my business, that I needed to travel for work. I told Linda the same thing, that I had to travel to Savannah and Atlanta for projects. I scheduled my time carefully. I was with you most of the time. With her, maybe a quarter of the time. It was exhausting, but I managed." "Why?" I asked, and my voice finally broke. "Why would you do this to me, to us? If you loved her, why didn't you just divorce me?" "Because I loved you too," he said. looking up at me with those eyes I'd loved for so long. I know that sounds impossible, but it's true. I loved you both. I love both families. I couldn't choose. I couldn't lose either of you. So you lied to everyone instead, for 40 years. He had no answer to that. Tell me about them, I said. Your other children. Do they look like ours? He hesitated, then nodded. David looks like Michael. Amanda looks like Patricia. Linda used to joke that all Walker children must come from the same mold. And you have grandchildren, 4 of them. Yes. Do you love them? Yes. That answer broke something in me. It was one thing to know he had another wife, another life, but to know he loved other grandchildren, that he'd been present for their births and birthdays and all the moments I thought we were sharing as a family. What about money? I asked. How did you support 2 families? The business did well. I made good money, and I kept 2 separate accounts. I gave you enough for our household, and I gave Linda enough for hers. It wasn't easy, but I managed. And when we were struggling, when I was working overtime to save money for Patricia's college, when Michael needed braces and we had to take out a loan, you had money that whole time, but you were giving it to another family. He closed his eyes. I did the best I could to balance both. Don't you dare, I said, my voice rising. Don't you dare tell me you did your best. Your best would have been being honest. Your best would have been not betraying everyone who loved you. What are you going to do? He asked quietly. I hadn't thought that far ahead. I don't know, but you need to leave right now. I can't look at you. Dottie, please, get out, I screamed. Get out of this house. He stood slowly like an old man, which I supposed he was. We both were. Too old for this kind of pain. I'll go to a hotel, he said, but we need to talk more. We need to figure this out. There's nothing to figure out. Our marriage is over. It's been over for 40 years, apparently. I just didn't know it. He left without another word. After he was gone, I called Patricia. She lived closest, just 15 minutes away. Mama, what's wrong? She asked as soon as she heard my voice. Come over, baby, and call your brothers. I need to tell y'all something. Within an hour, all 3 of my children were in my living room looking at me with worried faces. I told them everything. I showed them the Facebook pages, the photos, the bank statements. I watched their faces go through the same progression mine had. Disbelief, shock, horror, anger. That son of a... Michael started, but I held up my hand. Don't. He's still your father, even after all this. How could he do this? Patricia was crying. How could he lie to us for our entire lives? James, who rarely showed emotion, just sat there with his fists clenched. Does this other family know about us? I don't know, I admitted. Your father said he kept both lives separate. They probably have no idea we exist. We have half siblings, Patricia said wonderingly. A brother and sister we've never met. Are you going to contact them? Michael asked. I don't know. I don't know anything right now. The children stayed with me that night. Patricia made tea. James paced the living room like a caged animal. Michael kept going through the Facebook pages, looking at photos of his father's other life. He's at David's graduation here, Michael said, pointing at the computer screen. That was the same week as my graduation. He told us he couldn't come to my party because he had to work. He's holding Amanda's babies, Patricia said softly. He was there for their births. Where was he when Sophie and Stella were born? Working, I said bitterly. He was always working. The next few days were a blur. Thomas called repeatedly, but I didn't answer. He sent text messages that I deleted without reading. The children were furious with him. James, especially, felt betrayed. He'd been working with Thomas for years, had trusted him completely. A week after the revelation, Thomas showed up at the house while I was alone. He looked terrible, like he hadn't slept in days. Dottie, please, we have to talk. I let him in, but only because the neighbors were starting to stare. I've told Linda, he said, about you, about our children, about everything. How did she take it? About as well as you did. She threw me out too. I felt no satisfaction in that. What about her children? They're devastated. David won't speak to me. Amanda is too hurt to even look at me. Now you have 6 children who hate you instead of 3. Congratulations. He flinched. I deserve that. You deserve worse than that. We talked for hours. He tried to explain how it had happened, how one lie led to another, how the secret got too big to ever confess. He said he'd lived in constant fear of being discovered, but also couldn't imagine giving up either life. I love you, Dottie. I always have. That was never a lie. But you loved her too? Yes. You can't love two people like that, Thomas. Not without hurting everyone. I know that now. In the end, I filed for divorce. At 68 years old, after 44 years of marriage, I had to start over. The process was messy. Thomas had to account for all the money he'd spent on his other family. Our children learned the legal system in ways they never wanted to. Linda, I learned, also ended her relationship with Thomas. She felt as betrayed as I did, maybe more so, because their entire marriage had been a fraud from the beginning. The strangest part came 6 months later when Linda reached out to me. She sent a letter, forwarded through my lawyer, asking if we could meet. Against everyone's advice, I agreed. We met at a coffee shop halfway between Savannah and Macon. I recognized her from the photos, though she looked older and more tired in person. We sat across from each other, two women who had shared the same man for 40 years without knowing it. I don't know what to say, she started. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Neither did I replied. We talked for 3 hours. We compared stories, filled in the gaps in each other's timelines. When Thomas had told me he was at a construction site, he'd actually been at Linda's daughter's recital. When he'd told Linda he had an emergency project in Savannah, he'd been at our son's baseball game. He'd managed to be at major events for both families by carefully scheduling and lying about where he was, but he'd missed plenty too, claiming work when he was actually with the other family. Did you ever suspect? Linda asked. Not really. Looking back, there were signs, but I trusted him completely. What about you? Same. He was gone a lot, but he was a contractor. That seemed normal. Before we parted, Linda said something I'll never forget. We were both his wife, Dorothy, both his life. I don't think he loved either of us more or less. I think he genuinely loved both families. That doesn't excuse what he did, but I think it's the truth. I've thought a lot about that. Can a person truly love two families? Can you divide your heart and your life so completely and still be genuine in both places? I don't know. Maybe Thomas did love us both. But love without honesty isn't real love. It's just a beautiful lie. That was 3 years ago. I'm 72 now, and Thomas is 74. He lives alone in a small apartment near the port. Our children see him occasionally, more out of obligation than desire. From what I hear, Linda's children are the same way. He's lost both families in the end, which is perhaps the ultimate consequence of trying to have both. I've met Linda a few times since that first coffee. We're not friends exactly, but we have an understanding. We were both victims of the same deception. Sometimes we laugh about it. Dark humor, I suppose, about how we both picked out the same birthday gifts for him, or how we both made the same complaints about his snoring. Our children have met too, which is surreal. Michael and David, who are the same age and look eerily similar, had coffee once. It was awkward, they told me, but not hostile. They're both grown men with their own families trying to process the fact that they have a half-brother they never knew existed. Patricia and Amanda have connected more. They've discovered they're both teachers, both love the same books, both inherited that Walker stubbornness. They text occasionally now. James, my youngest, has had the hardest time with it all. He worked side by side with his father for years, trusted him completely, and felt like the biggest fool when the truth came out. He's in therapy now, working through the betrayal. His wife, Nicole, has been a rock for him. As for me, I've had to rebuild my life from scratch at an age when I thought everything was settled. The house Thomas built is mine now, part of the divorce settlement. I still live here, though I've redecorated completely. Every room that held memories of our life together has been repainted, refurnished, made new. I sold the alteration shop and fully retired. My hands hurt too much to sew all day anyway. Instead, I volunteer at the senior center teaching sewing classes to anyone who wants to learn. I've joined a book club, a real one this time, not a cover story for a secret life. I take water aerobics at the YMCA on Tuesday mornings. I have Sunday dinners with my children and grandchildren, though Thomas is no longer at the table. The grandchildren know the story now, the older ones at least. Ayana and Marcus asked me point blank what happened between Grandma and Grandpa, and I told them an age-appropriate version of the truth, that their grandfather had made some very poor choices that hurt a lot of people. They still see him occasionally, but it's not the same. How could it be? I've had to make peace with the fact that my entire adult life was built on a lie. Every anniversary we celebrated, Thomas was also celebrating an anniversary with Linda, just on a different date. Every I love you he said to me, he was also saying to her. Every intimate moment we shared, every dream we built together was only half of his reality. The hardest part isn't the betrayal itself, though that pain is real and deep. The hardest part is realizing I never truly knew the man I was married to for 44 years. Who was he really? Was he the Thomas who built our house with his own hands and held me when I cried? Or was he the Tom who built a deck for Linda's house and held her when she cried? Maybe he was both. Maybe he was neither. Maybe he was so busy being two different people that he never figured out who he really was. I've gone through all the stages of grief. The denial, when I first saw those Facebook photos and thought there had to be some explanation. The anger, when I wanted to burn everything he'd ever given me. The bargaining, when I wondered if maybe we could work through it, somehow. The depression, when I couldn't get out of bed for days. And finally, acceptance. Not acceptance that what he did was okay, but acceptance that it happened, and I have to live with it. People in Savannah know the story now. In a city this size, secrets don't keep for long. Some people look at me with pity, which I hate. Others admire me for how I've handled it, which feels strange because I don't feel admirable. I just feel like I'm surviving, taking it one day at a time. The question I get asked most often is whether I ever suspected, whether there were signs I missed. And honestly, yes. There were probably hundreds of small signs over the years. The phone calls he'd take in another room. The weekends he couldn't be reached. The occasional slip up in a story. The smell of unfamiliar perfume he'd explain away. But when you trust someone completely, you explain away those signs. You give them the benefit of the doubt. You believe the lies because the truth is too terrible to imagine. I've also been asked if I blame myself. If I think I drove him to it by not being enough somehow. And I've worked hard in therapy to understand that this wasn't about me not being enough. Thomas's choices were his own. Maybe he had some need inside him that no single person could fill. Maybe he was a coward who couldn't make a choice. Maybe he was just selfish. Whatever the reason, it was his decision, not my failure. Linda and I have talked about this too. We've compared notes on who we were as wives, what we did for him, how we loved him. And you know what we discovered? We were remarkably similar. We both cooked his favorite meals. We both supported his dreams. We both raised his children with love and care. We both forgave his flaws and celebrated his strengths. He didn't create two different lives because one of us was lacking. He created two lives because he wanted everything and was willing to lie to get it. There's a strange kind of sisterhood between Linda and me now. We're bonded by this shared experience that no one else can truly understand. We check in on each other sometimes, especially on hard days. Last Father's Day, we met for lunch and toasted with sweet tea to the fact that we'd both survive. We've even joked in our darkest moments that we should write a book together. How to Discover Your Husband Has Two Families, a survival guide. My children have been my saving grace through all of this. Michael calls me every Sunday evening just to chat. Patricia comes over for lunch every week. James stops by after work to check on the house, making sure everything's in good repair. They've closed ranks around me, protective and loving. They're also dealing with their own feelings about their father, their own sense of betrayal, but they've made sure I know I'm not alone. The grandchildren bring me joy in ways I can't even express. Little Thomas Jr., just 4 years old now, doesn't understand the complicated adult problems. He just knows Grandma Dot gives the best hugs and makes the best cookies. Ayana, who's 16 now, has told me I'm her hero for standing up for myself. That meant more to me than she'll ever know. I've also reconnected with some old friends I'd lost touch with over the years. When the story came out, people from my past reached out. Old classmates from Beach High School, former co-workers from Friedman's, even customers from my alteration shop. There's been an outpouring of support that's reminded me I'm more than just Thomas Walker's deceived wife. I'm Dorothy Mae Johnson, a woman who built her own business, raised 3 good children, and survived something that would have destroyed many people. I've taken up some new hobbies too. I joined a quilting circle at the church, creating beautiful things with my hands like Big Mama Rose taught me all those years ago. I've started keeping a journal, writing down my thoughts and feelings. My therapist suggested it, and it's been surprisingly helpful. Sometimes I write letters to my younger self, the 22-year-old girl who fell in love with a handsome carpenter. I tell her to trust her instincts, to ask more questions, to not be so quick to explain away the signs. But I also tell her that even with all the pain ahead, the life she'll live will have beauty in it too. 3 wonderful children, 6 grandchildren who light up the world, decades of honest work and community respect. One thing I've learned is that a life built on lies can still produce real things. My children are real. My grandchildren are real. The love I gave was real, even if the love I received was divided. The house I live in is real, built by Thomas's hands, even if his heart was somewhere else. My memories, tainted as they are now, still contain moments of genuine happiness. I can't erase 44 years of my life just because the foundation was cracked. I've also had to confront some hard truths about myself. I was perhaps too trusting, too willing to accept explanations that didn't quite make sense. I was raised to be a supportive wife, to not question my husband, to believe that a man who worked hard and provided for his family was doing his part. Maybe if I'd been more assertive, more demanding of his time and attention, things would have been different. Or maybe not. Maybe Thomas would have found a way to maintain his double life no matter what I did. Thomas has tried to apologize many times. He sent letters that I've read and thrown away. He's shown up at the house, though I've told him to stop. He's reached out through the children asking for forgiveness. Part of me understands that he's a broken man now, having lost everything. Part of me feels that's exactly what he deserves. I haven't forgiven him. I don't know if I ever will. Forgiveness is a complicated thing. Some people say you have to forgive to move on, to find peace. But I think maybe I can find peace without forgiving. I can accept what happened, understand that he's a flawed human being who made terrible choices and still not absolve him of the pain he caused. Maybe that makes me bitter. Maybe that makes me strong. I honestly don't know anymore. What I do know is that I'm still here. At 72 years old, I'm still standing, still living, still finding reasons to smile. My story didn't end when I discovered Thomas's betrayal. It just took a different turn than I expected. The path ahead looks different than the one I thought I was on, but I'm walking it with my head held high. I think about Linda sometimes, about what her life looks like now. I know she moved to a smaller place too, that her children check on her regularly. I know she's in therapy, same as me. I know she has good days and bad days, same as me. We're 2 women in our 70s, starting over in ways we never imagined we'd have to. But we're doing it. We're surviving. And maybe that's the message I want to leave with anyone listening to my story. Life can throw you the most unimaginable curveballs. The person you trusted most can betray you in ways you never dreamed possible. The life you built can turn out to be built on sand. But you can survive it. You can rebuild. You can find joy again, even if it's a different kind of joy than you expected. If you're going through something similar, whether it's a betrayal or a loss or any kind of life-shattering event, know that you're stronger than you think. Know that it's okay to be angry, to grieve, to fall apart for a while, but also know that you can put yourself back together, maybe not exactly as you were before, but into something new and resilient. I wake up every morning in the house Thomas built, but it's my house now. I have coffee on the porch he constructed, but I've planted new flowers that he never chose. I live in the life we created together, but I'm making it mine. And slowly, day by day, I'm becoming not Thomas Walker's wife, but simply Dorothy Mae Johnson. The woman I was before I met him. The woman I've always been underneath all the years and all the lies. My grandmother, Big Mama Rose, used to say that life is like sewing. Sometimes you have to rip out the seams and start over. Sometimes the pattern you thought you were following turns out to be wrong. But if you have steady hands and a willing heart, you can create something beautiful even from scraps. I'm creating something beautiful from the scraps of my life. It's not the quilt I thought I was making. It's not the pattern I planned. But it's mine, and that's enough. If this story touched your heart or made you think, please leave a like for this old grandmother. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more stories from my life. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? What time is it where you are? Have you ever had to rebuild your life after a betrayal? How did you find the strength to go on? I love hearing from y'all. It makes me feel less alone in this big old world to know that somewhere someone is listening to my story and maybe finding a little bit of themselves in it. Thank you for listening to this old woman ramble on. May you all find truth in your relationships, strength in your trials, and peace in your hearts. God bless you, wherever you are.